There's various forms of third-party ownership, but the most common kind is where a player's economic rights are essentially divvied up between the club that's buying him and one or more investment funds. Now these funds will raise money from investors, and then they might pay between 10% and 50% of the purchase price of the player. In return, they obviously get a stake in that player, and when he's sold on, they hope to make a profit. When that player is sold on, then they will take a slice of the commensurate transfer fee. So say they buy the player for £4 million, they'll put in £2 million. The hope is that when he's sold for £16 million, they can pocket their £8 million. That all sounds very simple, but it obviously gives rise to all sorts of potential conflicts of interest and complications when it comes to when that player should be sold, who they should be sold to, and really, who is that player playing for? Is he playing for the club, or is he playing for the investment fund that part owns him? FIFA quite typically has been strong on this in terms of words, but quite weak in terms of action. In 2007, Sepp Blatter came out and said he would ban this practice. Jerome Valcke, who's the General Secretary at FIFA, has called it a form of human slavery. But in terms of kind of concrete examples of rule changes or actually trying to stamp it out, we've not really seen that happen. In fact, we've seen it grow, and one of those reports they commissioned showed that players worth 1.1 billion euros are now accounted for under these player investment or third-party ownership schemes. This FIFA report says the clubs are held in a vicious cycle of debt and dependence, and effectively they become dependent on these funds. It's like an addiction because it helps them buy the players, and the very real fear, obviously, and this doesn't happen in every case by any means, but there's been pressure for individual players to play or not to play, as the case may be, because they're trying to manoeuvre them into position for a certain transfer. And certainly there's been cases where players have been parked at a certain club for 6 months or a year in an effort to increase their value and then to move them on. Now you might say there's nothing wrong with that the club get the best of the player and the player increases his value, so who loses? But once it spreads out an entire playing squad, then it starts to become very complex and very difficult to manage. You have got very real concerns about issues such as match fixing, whereby if we don't know the identity of the owners of these funds, and in most cases we don't, they very jealously guard their identity, how can we be sure that the integrity issues surrounding match fixing are not overlapping with those involved with these funds? Third-party ownership is banned in England, France and Poland. It basically comes down to the individual leagues and associations in those countries taking a view that this was a bad thing for the integrity of their competition and did pose a clear threat. They put down very clear rules that any player coming into the league had to be bought out, and then you had to prove he'd been bought out before you could register him. Although at the same time there is a certain irony in that the sort of amount of money, particularly in the Premier League, is pretty much the thing that allows the whole money go round to keep going, because it allows those investors to cash out, if you like, at the end of the process. So they might take a player from South America to Portugal. That player may then come and play in the Premier League. At that point, they'll be able to divide the spoils between them, and the huge amount of money from the Premier League's TV broadcasting deals will allow them to pay more for that player than they would get elsewhere.